Our next speaker is Erin Jackson. Erin is the founder of a website and online community called We Are Donor Conceived. She is, I presume, responsible for many of the connections that have already been previously forged among the donor conceived attendees. She is a freelance writer based in California, and her title is here.
Hi, thanks so much, David. I'm so happy and excited to be here and happy that this gathering is happening because I really think this is an important and crucial topic that we should all be discussing more. So 3 facts about me. I'm a Canadian living in San Diego. My favorite dessert is all of them. And when I was 35 years old, I learned my dad is not my biological father. Yep, that really happened. This simple fact didn't just blow my mind, it vaporized it, sending tiny brain fragments deep into outer space. At the very same time, it also made complete sense. Before I could form a conscious thought, I heard myself say, "I knew it!" I heard the truth from my mom, which was lucky. I think she thought it was the right time for me to know the full story about my origins. And, she picked a good time, really. I was 35, so it was quite late in retrospect. But at that point, I'd been happily married and living the dream as a food writer in San Diego for 5 years. I had a strong support group around me, and life was really good. I ordered a 23andMe test within about 90 seconds of hanging up the phone. It's the fastest $200 I've ever spent. In that moment, I realized half of my health history was suddenly a mystery, as was my ancestry. And I needed to know what the test would reveal, ideally as soon as possible. Oops. Oh no, I went forward in multiple slides, sorry. Where was I? Okay. Right. The next day, it felt like I woke up in an alternate universe. Nothing about me had changed, but suddenly half of my identity was up for debate. As a writer, I appreciated the crazy plot twist my life had just taken. It was confusing and exciting, but more than anything, I was grateful to finally know the truth about who I am, even though a lot of questions still remained. While I was waiting for the DNA test results, I remember staring into the mirror a lot. My face had always been a source of confusion. As you can see, I don't look much like my older sister at all. But now I had an explanation for my face. With some practice, I could look at my reflection, subtract my mother's features, and see this stranger staring back at me. It was mesmerizing and deeply weird. My DNA test results came back much sooner than expected. Yeah. There wasn't much in terms of disease markers. That section was pretty boring, actually. But I found out I'm about 25% Ashkenazi Jewish. So that was the first surprise. The second surprise just about knocked me out. I clicked on the DNA relatives tab, and right there, right on the top row, was this. Half-brother. Okay, so the text wasn't actually that big, but it sure felt like it. Half-brother? I was expecting to find a handful of super distant cousins who I would never talk to. I had no idea something like this was even possible. Seeing a sibling match was more shocking than learning my dad is not my biological father. His full name was listed, and naturally, I Googled him immediately. When I saw photos of his wedding, my brain exploded all over again. And this time, so did my heart. There's this us together in Toronto. As you can see, we're definitely half siblings. While Rich and I were getting to know each other, my husband James, an IT engineer who loves a good puzzle, was digging through my DNA test results. Through a fairly close DNA match, I think a second cousin once removed, whatever that means, and some genetic genealogy, He generated a family tree, found the common ancestor, and traced the path back down the generations to me, revealing the identity of my biological father, that once anonymous sperm donor in the process. An obituary from 2006 provided the final clue. With his full name confirmed, I turned to Google. I learned he moved to Toronto to pursue a PhD in philosophy, of all subjects, and hoped to teach the subject at a local university. On a personal level, this resonated deeply. There were photos, too. Thanks to classmates.com, I learned he was on the swim team, and he edited his high school yearbook. 2 things I also did in high school. I saw his high school grad photo and his university undergrad photo with 70s fashion and massive sideburns in full effect. Thank you, classmates.com. It was surreal to see his face. He didn't look exactly like I pictured, but the resemblance was undeniable. At first, finding out his name, seeing a photo, and learning some small details about his life felt like a miracle. I wept in gratitude. But later, I didn't feel so fortunate. Knowing this basic information no longer felt like a gift. It felt like justice. After the initial shock wore off, I wanted to know everything I could learn about donor conception. So I hit the library, and I hit the library hard. I absorbed scores of newspaper articles and academic studies. I read books, listened to podcasts, and watched documentaries. There was a surprising amount of content available on a subject I had never really considered. Very quickly, I was faced with my own ignorance on the subject, which was nearly complete. When I saw posters about sperm donation in my university, I thought the idea of helping gay or infertile couples was pretty great. At the time, it seemed like a win-win. I had no idea how donor-conceived people feel about their existence. I was only thinking about the parents and how they would benefit from having a child. Put another way, I did not know what I did not know. My husband tipped me off to a few Facebook groups devoted to donor conception. I joined a large one with parents of donor-conceived individuals, donors and donor-conceived people, and a smaller group populated by donor-conceived people from all over the world. I immediately learned I was not alone. There were lots of people who felt the same way I did. There were people who were struggling with the emotional impact of receiving such life-changing information, and a few who had worked to change the laws in their country to protect the rights of donor-conceived individuals. These people became my heroes. I wanted to do my part to help and support the community, so in 2016, I launched a website called We Are Donor Conceived. It started mostly as a page of resources, just all the stuff I'd come across in my own quest for information. I also decided to start a Facebook group to disseminate the website content, since that's where the majority of conversations were taking place. On the first day, the website got over 1,000 hits. People from all over the world were looking at it. I was amazed. A few years later, with the help of some Facebook group members from Canada, the US, and Australia, we created a welcome message, which I will play for you now.
I found out I was donor conceived when I was 35 years old. It was intensely shocking. It kind of felt like 1,000 fireworks going off in my head at the same time. But it also made a lot of sense and was deeply validating.
I found out I was donor conceived when I was 7 years old. I learned the truth from my parents, who sat me down and gave me a book that explained what donor conception was, and at the time that didn't really mean anything to me, but that has changed as I've grown older, and I've really become interested in where I've come from.
I found out that I was donor conceived when I was 22. I took an ancestry DNA test and a sister popped up, and I'm an only child.
I found out that I was donor conceived when I was 38 years old. My parents finally decided to tell me the truth after my sister insisted that they tell me, because she was afraid that I would find out from other family members, because apparently it was a big family secret that everybody knew except me.
When I found out the truth about my origins, I was disgusted. I couldn't look in the mirror. I didn't want to see myself. I didn't want to see my body. I didn't want to hear my name. There was a huge question mark, and I didn't know where I had come from.
When I found out the truth about my origins, I felt relieved. But at the time, because I was so young, I really couldn't grasp what donor conception or being donor conceived mean to me. And it means something completely different now that I have found my donor. And it has meant to me in finding my donor that I have, in a sense, found my identity and understood fully who I am and where I've come from.
When I found out the truth, I just remember screaming the word "what" over and over and over again and just being completely hysterical and just realizing that half my family tree and identity was completely gone and replaced with a big question mark. It was just really surreal experience, and to realize that I was only half related to my sister was pretty painful realization as well. And then just not knowing who that person was that is half of me, and having the possibility of never knowing who that was just felt completely unreal and unfair. But at the same time, it was super validating because my whole life I felt like I didn't look like anybody in my family, and I asked if I was adopted. And I just had this feeling that something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And so this was the answer to that feeling.
I've found that being donor conceived, it can be isolating when you don't know other donor conceived people because you feel like no one truly understands. But I think that finding other people that have been through similar circumstances, it can really help the process become a lot easier.
If you've just found out that you're donor conceived, you should know that you're not alone, you're not a freak, and it's okay to feel complex emotions.
No matter what you're feeling, I want you to know that it's totally normal to feel a little crazy right now. And also that it does get easier with time. So hang in there.
You can feel what you're feeling, and whatever you are feeling is okay.
Being donor conceived can be an isolating experience, but with the advent of DNA testing, hundreds of people are finding out the truth, and that's a good thing.
Family secrets are toxic, and the truth sets us free.
We Are Donor Conceived is a resource center and international community for donor conceived people. We get it. We know that learning one of your biological parents is an anonymous donor is something that can change your life and your identity forever.
We get it because we've lived it. And we want you to know that you're not alone. Not even close.
Thank you. So since I posted this video on YouTube and the We Are Donor Conceived website, membership numbers have grown significantly. We were at around 200 members for the first year or so, but now there are well over 1,000 members and new people are joining every day. One reason is DNA testing. DNA testing is changing everything. It's uniting donor-conceived half-siblings, providing clues and closure for those seeking their genetic identity, and creating powerful new family bonds. So let's just talk about DNA for a second. In 1979, when I was conceived, the importance of DNA was not understood. Most people probably first heard about it in the context of a criminal investigation or prosecution. But now we know a lot more. DNA is the genetic code that determines all the characteristics of a living thing. At the very basic level, it's what makes you, you, and not somebody else. Sperm and eggs contain DNA, so when donors give their reproductive cells to a third party, they are not simply helping another person have children. They are allowing that person to raise their biological or genetic offspring. The people who are born from these donations will share the same amount of DNA as the children these sperm or egg donors might someday have with a romantic partner. And let me tell you, a lot of us look a lot like our genetic fathers or mothers in the case of egg donation. Case in point, here's Amy, Colleen, and Leah with their biofathers. Here's Amber and her bio dad. Amber says, "He calls me the clone." This is Becky and her bio dad. Becky says, please everyone tell me how much like him I am, because that is the greatest compliment I could get. And this is James with his biopops. This is the day they met. Later, he updated the group with the following message. I had a thing last week with biopops. The barman said it was lovely to see a grown man having a good time with his dad. I felt a proudness that I can't really describe, but I was so moved by the fact that someone from the outside world could tell we were related. And here are a bunch more. So this is probably a good time to transition into talking about some important facts about donor conception and what it's like to be a product of these technologies. I've heard people mention that we need more evidence, so that's what I'm trying to present here. I'll be referencing the most recent survey conducted by We Are Donor Conceived. I started doing this on an annual basis in 2016 after I noticed that most of the available research focuses on young children. First, some demographic info about survey participants. This year we had 312 responses from people aged 15 to 74. It's almost twice as many as the previous year, which really shows that the group is growing and there's a lot of interest in people talking about this subject. The survey attracted responses from people born in 15 different countries, including Australia, South Africa, Belgium, Norway, and the UK. The majority were from the United States and Canada. Most respondents were raised by heterosexual parents, most were female, and though the survey was open to individuals conceived via donor eggs, sperm, or both, 98% of respondents indicated they were conceived via donor sperm. So, 6 things you need to know about donor conception. Number 1, donor-conceived people want to know their origins. When people find out they are donor-conceived, they are likely to seek the identity of their missing genetic link. 67% of respondents said they took a DNA test to find family members, meaning the donor or donor sibling. Of those who learned the identity of their donor, 54% attempted communication with him or her. The most commonly cited reason among those who didn't was that their donor was deceased. And I asked people if it was important for them to know their donor and why. And I'm going to share a few responses. Before I found my donor and my half-siblings, I probably would have said no, but now I can't imagine my life without them. I reached out in the first place just out of curiosity. It is extremely important. I had an absolute need to know the source of half of my DNA. I could hardly think about anything else until I found the identity of my biological father. Yes, I need to know genetic history, ancestry history, for just peace of mind, but because I'm double donor conceived, it's a huge part of my identity. Who am I? Where do I come from? Am I like him? Do I have her smile? And yes, he is half of me, genetics matter. Straight to the point. Number 2, there is no limit on how many offspring a single donor can produce. A couple people have mentioned this, but I just want to put an underline under this. And so according to a recent article in Los Angeles Magazine, at California Cryobank, which is the biggest sperm bank in the country, most donors produce a sample 2 to 3 times a week. Using this estimate, that's about 130 in a single year. The cryobank suggests parents purchase 4 vials per each planned child, so that could reasonably result in 32.5 offspring. Each year, a donor is actively providing sperm to a clinic. If that sounds like a low number to you, and it doesn't to me, because 32.5 half siblings is kind of a lot, understand that many donors are active for several years and may donate to more than one clinic. Also, it's regular practice for samples to be split into multiple vials, which could increase the number of offspring exponentially. You also have to consider that the banks ship all over the globe, and they're following industry guidelines. There are no actual regulations. So let's just do a quick comparison of the US with other countries. Hopefully you can read that. Most countries on this chart have a max offspring per donor limit between 1 and 25. In the US, the recommendation from the American Society of Reproductive Medicine is 25 children per population of 800,000. So putting that into context, in New York City, that could mean a donor-conceived person could have 268 siblings living in the 5 boroughs. Yeah. Someone in Los Angeles could have 125, which is still way too many. This one got a little weird, but I'll read all the answers. So just for fun, I asked people in the We Are Donor Conceived group how long or frequently their bio father was a donor, if they had that information. Responses included the following: about 150 times, 4 years, 3 times a week, 10 years, about 300 to 400 times, 12 years, twice a week. So far, there are 15 of us, but my doctor thinks there are likely 100. For those of you doing the math on that kind of donation schedule, that's 1,248 donations. And he told us 15 years, and the age gap confirms it. Number 3, donor-conceived people do not support anonymous donation. Luckily, no one's made an argument for that, but I still want to, again, just put an underline under this point, because it might be the most important takeaway in my presentation. By the way, the fact that we would literally not exist without donor conception is not lost on any of us. This belief comes from our own lived experience that everyone, regardless of how they were conceived, has the right to their biological origins. This includes where they come from and who they come from. Here are some relevant stats from the latest We Are Donor Conceived survey. 78% of respondents do not support anonymous sperm or egg donation to conceive a child. Only 11% are in favor. The use of non-anonymous or identifiable donor eggs or sperm to conceive a child has more support amongst respondents. 55% agree, while 28% disagree. And 91% agree that all donor-conceived people should have the option to learn the identity of their donor. And I also asked a question, another question about this that I didn't originally include, but I just want to make a point that we think that's because that information belongs to us, not the government, not a sperm bank. It's ours. And also, other people have noticed that's mentioned that anonymous sperm donation is banned in several countries. The UK halted anonymous sperm donation in 2005. Victoria, Australia followed in 2017. Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, New Zealand, and the Netherlands and Germany also do not allow anonymous donors. So ending sperm donor anonymity is not a new or controversial idea. Number 4, DNA tests are changing everything. I talked about this a little bit before. Donor-conceived people want to know their origins, including who and where they come from. They want to know their biological mother and father and their donor siblings. And they can. This is the great part. With nothing but their own spit and $100, donor-conceived people can find their missing genetic links via DNA testing. It's amazing. So what does this new reality look like? 72% of survey respondents have identified a donor sibling. 55% have identified their donor or biological father through DNA testing. Most people are discovering 1 to 5 siblings for now, at least. That's 60% of people, but 13% had discovered 20 or more. And there were a couple of people who had sibling numbers in the triple digits. 37% of respondents also found out they were donor conceived from the DNA test. Many people learn this information as adults, and you could be next. You could be one of us. Remember, I was 35 years old. Number 5, most donor-conceived people do not know the truth about their origins. So before 1990, when donor insemination was primarily being accessed by heterosexual couples, many doctors advised their patients to go home and pretend this never happened. That was actually the medical advice. This was intended to protect the family from negative judgments of others, secure the donor-conceived child's place in the family, and obscure the husband's infertility. The problem is it required parents to maintain a lie at the center of their family for the entire lifetime of their children. As a person conceived through third-party reproduction, I find this incredibly disturbing, and yet it continues to this day. So what does the American Society for Reproductive Medicine have to say about this? Well, in an ethics committee paper published by that group, they say, quote, "Disclosure to donor-conceived persons of the use of donor gametes or embryos in their conception is strongly encouraged, while ultimately the choice of recipient parents." Donor-conceived people disagree with this, by the way. We, as a group, believe secrets are toxic. 86% of survey respondents believe it is wrong for parents to keep this information a secret from their child. So what percentage of donor-conceived people are in the dark about their origins? Well, this kind of thing is really impossible to measure, but I've seen estimates ranging from 70 to 90%. Even in places like Australia and the UK, where anonymous donors are no longer offered, it's safe to say the majority of donor-conceived people don't know the truth about their origins. Number 6, this is the fun slide. Yay, we made it. It is possible to immediately fall in love with a stranger. And to my donor-conceived siblings watching this, I just want to make sure I mean platonic love, not romantic. Let's clear that up right off the top. Donor-conceived people use phrases like instant connection or natural bond to describe their feelings toward their donor siblings. 89% believe all donor-conceived people should have the option to know how many donor-conceived people they have, and 86% believe all donor-conceived people should have the option to learn their siblings' identities. These relationships are complicated, real, and important. I also want to say, as a community, we feel a queasy excitement around the holiday season. DNA tests are typically on sale between Black Friday and Christmas, so we're all bracing for new siblings with hope, but also with fear that they won't know the truth about their origins. So it's like a happy, scared kind of feeling that you would understand if you were one of us. It can be wonderful when everything goes well, and truly devastating when it doesn't, and most of us have experienced both of these outcomes. I've been pretty lucky on the sibling front. I now know of 4 of them, seen here. This is Matt, Rich, Mark, and Nina. This is my new reality, and it's definitely strange, but learning the truth about my origins is the most amazing thing that's happened in my life. It doesn't change the past, but it has altered my future forever. It has presented monumental challenges, exciting opportunities like this, periods of intense depression, and unadulterated joy. I've also made hundreds of new friends, many of whom are here today. But when I think about the ethics of donor conception, things get more complicated. The fact that I'm donor conceived is a tiny bit of information about me that has enormous lifelong consequences. Because I am donor conceived, I do not have an accurate medical history. In fact, half of it is completely blank. There is no state-sanctioned method for me to find out any information about my genetic father. I am not entitled to know his name or even see a photo of him. I also have no idea how many half-siblings I have, who they are, or where they live. All of this feels dehumanizing. So, is donor conception ethical? Well, here are some inconvenient truths to consider. All children are born into the center of their own universe. We have our own minds and our own identities. We are not the products of our parents. We belong to ourselves. More than 26 million people have taken a consumer DNA test. Ancestry.com is worth more than $3 billion. It's human nature to want to know your origins. Donor-conceived people are not immune to this. A very natural instinct, by the way. We're people too. Donor-conceived people are not the product of some unknown mystery donor. For each of us, there is one specific person who is genetically responsible for our existence. For some of us, knowing the identity of this person is an absolute need. In order for gamete donation to be ethical, the companies who profit from the sale of reproductive material must recognize and respect the physical, mental, and emotional needs of the people they help to create. So I just want to wrap up this presentation with some messages that I got from people in the We Are Donor Conceived group. I wanted to share them directly with the group. So let's do this. Oh wait, no, never mind. That comes next. Sorry, I've never done this before. So there is strong support among donor-conceived people to institute the following reforms. 1, recognize the emotional challenges for donor-conceived people. This includes genetic bewilderment, grief and loss, fear of rejection, and anxiety related to finding our donor siblings. 2, end sperm and egg donor anonymity. It is unethical and irresponsible to offer it knowing what we know. 3, limit the amount of offspring produced per donor. By the way, most donor-conceived people say 5 or 10 maximum. Preserve donor information, including updated health information, which could potentially be life-saving. 5, implement counseling for donors and recipient parents. All parties should be aware of the reality and consequences of their actions now and in the future, and facilitate contact between donors, donor offspring, and donor siblings. I believe these reforms are in the best interest of donor-conceived people and should be the priority of all companies that profit from our creation. In the US, a handful of companies dominate the industry, which is valued at about $3.5 billion, and they could change the way they do business tomorrow. Okay, now those quotes that I was talking about. All right. The general consensus among the public seems to be that donor-conceived people are selfish or violating legal and privacy obligations of their biological parents who are donors by seeking them out. Why are donor-conceived people wrong to want this information, but adoptees or those conceived through one-night stands are justified? I'm tired of being treated as a second-class citizen because of decisions that others made on my behalf before I existed. Donor conception involves a commodification of human life. Personally, I do not like the idea that I was effectively bought and sold by a commercial industry that makes money off of fertility issues and then promulgates a false narrative that it's okay to lie about it. I'm not a product and I'm not a secret. I shouldn't be ashamed to be alive. There is no such thing as ethical anonymous donation. It is an intentional severance of a biological and ethnic family connection with only monetary gain. My ethnicity cannot be changed with money. My parentage cannot be transferred for convenience. My body and identity cannot and will not be sold. We want our right to our own biological identity acknowledged. We deserve access to our own family medical history. We are donor conceived and we're not keeping that a secret any longer. Okay, that's all. This is me and my baby bro, Matt. As you can see, DNA does not lie. Oh boy. Thank you.
Thanks. Erin, thank you for your talk. I think the biggest thing that we donor-conceived need to be prepared for in this particular context is the epistemological problem that has already been pointed out earlier, at least in the last presentation, and it's a real one. So from a scientific standpoint, we have to realize that studies, or in this case, these are informal surveys, right, have a certain selection bias, right? So in this case, the selection bias involves a lot of people, adults of often of a certain generation, who discovered later in life or by accident that they were donor conceived, and that's how a lot of us made our way into your group. Mm-hmm. The other part of the epistemological problem, epistemology for those without the philosophy background, that's the study of knowledge. So how do we know what we know, and how do we know what is actually true? And the other part of that problem is that, as you point out, most people who are donor conceived don't know it.
Right.
So there's no way to ask them.
Right.
And so it's actually it's an insoluble problem. So it's actually an enormous scientific or in this case epistemological problem. We have to arm ourselves and be prepared for this as the counter argument. Oh, well, your data are actually self-selecting and they're heavily biased towards, so therefore they don't count. But we have to, I think a legitimate counter argument is that every single one of our accounts are real. We're real. We count. So nobody has any right to discount our voices. So there are dozens of us who gathered in this room today, and we're here precisely because we realized that the whole fact of our existence and the way we got into this world created inherently some significant emotional or psychological issues for us, issues involving identity. And we are talking about nothing more, nothing less than the most fundamental familial connections and severing that connection, namely parent and child. We're not talking about just some little bits of information. You can't reduce this. There's nothing that's simply reductionist about this entire concept, or positivistic. It's just, we just want a little bit of fact did I have somebody in my family tree who died of some disease or whatever. It goes to the very core, like one of severing parent and child ties, underprivileging the children and the adults that they become, and throwing into question the very core of psychology, namely identity. And it might not be possible to quote unquote study all of this truly objectively. So we need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this survey for a couple of years, and inevitably someone will say something like, oh, yeah, like these people are biased, they're in a Facebook group for donor-conceived people, but my rebuttal is we're a small group. We have been artificially silenced by our parents not disclosing who we really are, and those of us who are speaking publicly, I think we need to be heard. And also, to your point of how essential this is, the way I think about it is, my desire to know who my biological father is so ingrained that I would need a lobotomy to not care. It's like in my marrow. It goes so deep. And I mean, that's why I'm here.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yes. I recently heard a podcast, Family Secrets, in which I heard Sylvia Borstein. And I took a quote from, I took something she said, saying as part of who I would like to be now. And it's don't duck. So in the spirit of don't duck, I'm here as a mother of a donor-conceived child. Certainly, Gabrielle has been the greatest gift in our lives, but all of you are a gift here too for us, because we know now that we're not the only ones. When you're told to keep that secret, you think you're the only ones in the world who've had to endure this. And so you're given this gift and you raise a child trying to protect them from every harshness life has to offer. And then you find out that something you did creates the greatest pain in their life so far, and that's a very difficult thing. So I honor you, and I certainly believe that the future of this field is in this room right now, and I thank you all for that.
My name is Alicia. I came from Seattle, specifically to meet some new family. My situation is a little bit different. I found out in my 50s that the father that raised me wasn't my father. My mother had an affair. And I deeply want to thank you for speaking up, because I know how difficult that was for you, and that you both came together, because my mother would not be able to do what you did. So I appreciate you coming forth like that. One thing I am doing is I'm a vice president of a non-paternal event, or not parent expected group, and we have about 5,600 members, and we're working with donor conceived and everybody that's dealing with these type of issues. And the biggest thing is giving mental health support. And I just wanted to bring that up, because this seems like a thread that I'm seeing with those of you here. And we need each other, and it just made me feel so good when you brought up the fact that we're doing something important in here. And I'm so thankful for the folks that have been speaking, that have such knowledge that we need from you guys. And being from Washington State, we have legislation I know we're on the forefront of getting really good things happen positively for the donor conceived. So thank you for speaking and for bringing your voice to the table.
Thank you so much. So I just have 2 questions to help me understand better. So first of all, I was really struck that 84% of your membership is female. And I wondered if that demographic is common across different donor-conceived individual groups, and if you have any insight into why there are more women joining those groups. And then my second question is, so you mentioned the right to know the identity of the donor, and I just wanted to know, so what would, in your view, what would be the ideal model? Like, what information would you want to receive? So the name, a picture, like what would the ideal kind of dossier look like?
Okay, so the first question, the survey, I think it was a survey that was 84% women. The group is also mostly women. And I mean, we speculate about that a lot internally, and I think, for me, I think the explanation is that we talk about like real emotional stuff. I mean, it's heavy, it's deep, we get in there, you know, if you're in the group, you know that it gets real, and I think women are maybe more likely to be attracted to that kind of group and more comfortable sharing, although, there are several male members here today too, so. Also, maybe it's just a Facebook thing. Maybe women are just more likely to join Facebook groups. I mean, the Instant Pot group I'm in is also a majority female, so I don't know what's up with that. It's the only other group I'm part of. And your second question, what would be ideal? I think that probably varies person to person. I mean, and I do acknowledge there are some people who don't want to know anything. Like, they just rather, like, I'm afraid of what I find out. They don't want to jeopardize their relationship with their parents, you know. For some people, that's not a road they want to go down. For me, I was totally different about that. I mean, I want to know the name. And when you say the donor, I want to be clear, like, this is my biological father. I don't see him as the donor, you know. I want to know name. I want to see a photo. I want to know all about him. I want to know, like, what makes him laugh, you know, how his life has been, if he has any, you know, lessons you can teach me. I mean, I would like to meet him in person. It's not about getting like a folder of information. Yeah.
It's interesting, the woman from Seattle who mentioned that she found out about her father not being her biological father. We've had a number of cases. I mean, the data shows that 1 to 3% of people have misattributed paternity. And we have actually had a number of situations at Columbia where...
Can you say who we are?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Cheryl Kunis. I'm a nephrologist and bioethicist in New York at Columbia. And I find it amazing, 1 to 3%. We've had a number of cases where our bioethics committee, the kidney transplant program, when we found out that such and such a person who wanted to donate a kidney to her father was not the one person, we found out that the father who wanted to donate a piece of his liver to the baby was not his father. They all decided they did not want to tell these people that they were not the father of the child. I was very upset about it as the committee, the kidney transplant program, the bioethics committee, they decided they didn't want to tell these people. I was very upset about it because I felt that in this day and age where we really want to find out reality, that it was the wrong thing to do. And I felt in many ways it was done in order to protect the recipients who were getting the organs or whatever, because the organs were all given. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts were in terms of the psychological aspects of that kind of a situation like you had compared to finding out that you know your father isn't your father for another reason because you were donor conceived.
I mean, I've only experienced the outcome I've experienced, but I feel like it's very similar. I mean, there's lots of layers to it. I mean, there's the fact that my parents lied to me about my identity for 35 years, so there's like the betrayal element involved. And then there's knowing that a doctor and a college student benefited financially from this happening to me, this information being withheld from me. Like there's a whole business that thrives based on like denying people what I consider to be a basic human right. So I think it's probably a little bit more complicated in this sense.
It sounds like you think it's very different than the mother just having a number of partners and not knowing who the father was or whatever.
I think there are, I mean, I don't really know. I don't know if I can answer that. I think there are different situations that come into play, because this is like, we're talking about a business that exists for this purpose versus someone who may not know who the father of her child is.
Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing your story. I have a question. In your experience and your experience talking to other people, if you're able to what extent is the keeping of the secret loom really large? The longer it's kept, you mentioned secrets are toxic, versus the not having information. I mean, I appreciate it. You can't just introspect and disentangle the percentage, but I'm wondering if in your experience at all, people who feel like they've always known because it was never a secret, feel less deprived of something?
I have a little bit of data on that. You can check the We Are Donor Conceived website, by the way. I just published the 2019 survey, and I included a little data point that sort of talks to this point, and sorry, I don't have the percentage off the top of my head, but I asked people to respond to this statement: the circumstances of my conception caused me to feel angry, hurt, or confused, and people on a 1 to 5 scale reacted to that. And there was a larger percentage of people who disagreed with that statement, who were told either as a child or so young that they don't remember. So I think telling early is like the best way you can, like head off some sort of life-changing crisis, like identity crisis, like I experienced, and a lot of other people. Does that answer your question? Okay, good.
I really appreciate the talk, and I'm learning a lot. I have 2 questions about terminology.
Okay.
So one, given the focus on the fact that it's a business and people are profiting from it, I wonder why, instead of using the term donor that people want you to use, you actually don't use a different term, because this isn't donation, it's actually selling.
Yeah.
So, on the other side, the term parent, so I come from law, and their parent is a legal determination and not a biological determination. And law has actually caught up and is like beginning to reflect a lot of insights from work on child development, where they understand parenting as a practice. And so people, from a child's perspective, a parent is someone who's actually doing the work of parenting. And so law is slowly caught up with that.
Yeah.
But even historically, I mean, law tied parenthood to marriage and not to biology.
Right.
So a child born to a married woman had 2 legal parents.
Right.
It wasn't clear whether the man was the biological father or not, and a child born to an unmarried woman had no legal parents.
Right.
And so I just wonder whether in using the term parent, there's also, like, why you're making the choices about the term.
Okay, yeah, thank you for asking, and I was really hoping to address this, so I'm glad this came up. Yeah, I have feelings about the term donor conceived, even though it's like in the URL and the name of the group I started, because they're not donors, they're being paid. I like to think of them as sperm vendors. I mean, that's more accurate. But that's the word that people use. So I'm using the word people use because they understand it, and I'm trying to evolve the definition of what a donor is. They're giving something, but they're not giving it freely, and they're giving more than people seem to acknowledge. Like, people will say things like, "Oh, it's just sperm," and it's like, yeah, that's half of my DNA. I don't think it's just sperm. And then to the parents question, I try not to use that word as much as possible, because for me, parent is like a verb. It's like an action word. But I used it in the case of a non-gender specific way of saying, because it gets really complicated when you're like donor / sperm vendor / like the language is just very complicated around this. And it is a frustration of mine. I would love if there was another word. I mean, at one point I asked the group, like, is there a better word? And there really isn't. So kind of stuck with it for now.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. We've heard a lot about this claim that society is over-geneticized. And some of the things you've said maybe go against that, but I'm wondering what your reaction is to that claim, and how much you think we should be trying to change the social context around the importance of genetics to identity.
I think that is a question that I'm not sure I have an answer to. What does over-geneticized mean? What's the definition of that? Like, you're saying people are placing too much importance on genetic identity? Yeah, it's really interesting, because until I found out my dad is not my biological father, I would say I put like no importance on that. So but knowing that someone else was made it important. And it wasn't so much about genetics, it's about identity for me. And that person's identity is tied into my identity. And that's something I struggle with too, as a self-assured kind of independent person. You know, the fact that like some guy out there, I would need to know who he was to know who I was, is something I'm still struggling with. I don't think it makes logical sense, but it's just an emotional reality that we all kind of struggle with.
I'm just wondering, for the surveys that you've been doing, did you ever do any sort of like cross-tabulation or be able to section out respondents who were like raised by like gay and lesbian parents versus people raised in like straight cis homes?
I did ask that question, but the vast majority were raised by heterosexual parents. It was like 86%. So I didn't think there was enough of a sample to really make any sort of inference. I do know that the people who are raised by single mothers or lesbian parents are more likely to know at a younger age that they were donor conceived, probably out of necessity, because there had to be some explanation for how they came to be. But other than that, I didn't find like there was enough data to really isolate and explore that group, just due to sample size.
Erin, thank you for everything you've done to advocate for the community. I just wanted to offer a counterpoint to the insurmountable problem of selection bias in the survey. If a bunch of coal miners are working and they see their canary die, do they argue about selection bias?
Yeah, also, thank you so much. It's been just such an honor and so healing to be able to be here. My name is Zave. I'm donor conceived. I don't know. I had some thoughts and they all kind of left. But I guess some things I wanted to bring up in addition are like the future of where this technology goes, and my concern that we talk about the ethics and how do you make it ethical and this and that. But when it gets down to it, you're buying and selling human life and you are designing a human being, and this technology will continue to progress unless we put these limitations and acknowledge that maybe there are technologies that are not worth it given the unintended consequences. And your point about the looking in the mirror and just bewilderment there. Yeah, I was born to a woman who was very abusive, and so my situation is there's a stranger who sold my rights away to a woman who just ended up abusing me. And this kind of ties into the objective in the studies of like, you can give me as many numbers as you want, but my experience is I have someone out there who does not care, who used me to make money, and then another person who used me for their abuse. And the ramifications of that have led me to feel like I do not see a way that this is ethical given the experience of being a human being who is sentient and knowing what is happening to you. So that's kind of my little rant.
Maybe what we should do is, so I had said that we'll have a group discussion. Thank you, Erin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.